everybody, Peter Billigus here of the Peter Billigus channel, where we always, hopefully, make finance fun. Today we are asking an unusual question about buying a house. Now, buying a house is not an unusual financial activity. Millions of people do it every year, and many people, their house is their biggest investment. But there is a growing trend, especially among first-time homebuyers, regarding buying a house. And that question is, should I buy a house with a friend? The answer might surprise you. Now, before I answer that question, let me draw a few boundaries. By friend, I don't mean boyfriend, or girlfriend, or life partner, or fiance, or significant other. I mean just friend. Imagine two dudes, Ted and Fred. Now, Ted and Fred are friends, and someday they want to get married, just not to each other. They're simply friends. One day, over a cup of coffee, Fred says, I went to the bank and they told me that since I make $50,000 a year, the largest loan they would give me is $150,000. And Ted says, hey, I also went to the bank and they told me the same thing. I also make $50,000 a year and all I could borrow was $150,000. But Ted says, the problem, Fred, is that the area that I want to live in, the cheapest house starts at $250,000 and I can't afford that. But Fred says, I want to live in the same area, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Then there is a moment of silence. After a while, Ted gets an idea. He turns to Fred and says, what if we bought a house together? I mean, I can get a $150,000 loan, and you can get a $150,000 loan. Doesn't that mean if we combine and buy a house together, we could get a $300,000 loan? Now, three questions should arise here. Number one, why do Ted and Fred both have British accents in this example? Number two, why do their British accents sound like they are faked? And most important, should they even do this? Look, we all know that real estate is expensive. We've all seen the posts on social media that say, my parents bought this house for $26,000 in 1973, but today it costs $500 million. It's hard to buy a home. It's hard to save up the money for the down payment, and it's hard to get a loan that aligns with your income. Slowly, people are looking for alternative methods to purchase a home, and one method is to buy a property with someone else. By the way, I actually did this when I bought my first house. That wasn't my first house, but more on that later. So what are the advantages and disadvantages to buying a home with a friend? Well, in the advantage column, we have, number one, probably you could get a bigger or nicer house. Your two incomes will be combined, and you will be able to get a bigger loan than you would on your own. A bigger loan usually means a bigger or nicer house, or a house in the location that you really want. Number two, you'll also enjoy lower expenses. If you buy with a friend, expenses are cut in half. If the dishwasher breaks, you only have to pay for half of a new dishwasher. You also get to live with a roommate that you not only know, but has a vested interest in keeping the place neat. We've all had a roommate who lives like this. Typically, not always, but typically, when everyone living in the property is an owner, they treat the place better. Chores are also shared. There's more people to do the chores, or there's more money to pay people to do the chores. And I guess one of your chores is smelting pig iron. I guess someone has to do it. Now, in the disadvantage column, we have, number one, you are each fully responsible. When you get a loan together, you will sign a mortgage, which is a legal contract that allows the bank to take the house if you fail to pay the loan. If you and your friend get a $300,000 loan, that does not mean that you're responsible for half and your friend is responsible for half. From the perspective of the bank, you are both responsible for everything. The legal term is jointly and severally liable. If your friend bails on you to pursue their career as a masked vigilante, well, then you are on the hook for the whole enchilada. That's not an enchilada, that's a pizza. Also, if you buy a house with a friend, you no longer have total control of the property. If you want to put in a new oven and you choose this oven, but your co-owner says, well, I choose this oven, which oven do you go with? Who gets the final say? Personally, I would go with that one. My tuna casserole comes out perfect. Another disadvantage, when to sell. If you want to sell, but your co-owner wants to stay in, what should you do? Another problem, what if one person can't meet the financial obligations of the property, but the other person can? Do you loan money to your friend? Do they loan money to you? And perhaps the most powerful of all the disadvantages to buying a house with a friend is that it can put the friendship at risk. Regardless of which home you buy and in what market, a lot of success with this strategy is going to depend on the strength of the friendship. Market conditions will make it easier, but even in a good market, there will be some disagreements. I understand some people are thinking, Peter, I am worried if I buy a house with my friend, he will abandon me and I will get stuck with the payments and have to sell at a loss, declare bankruptcy, and have nothing to show for it except a tattoo across my chest that reads, how does anyone ever come to know the first 2 rules of Fight Club? So the one piece of advice that I cannot give is advice on friendship, but I can make it easier for you if this is the path you are going to choose. So here are some things to consider if you're going to buy a house with a friend. First of all, if you are buying a house with a friend, does that affect which house you would buy? I mean, you could probably get a nicer house, but other than that, what type of property should you consider? A condo? A single family? A 2-family? A multifamily? A fixer-upper? The answer is that the type of property doesn't really matter. What matters more is the price you pay for it. That being said, the friendship will dictate to some extent which type of property you buy. If you and your friend are up for a little light renovation, then maybe a fixer-upper would be a good way to go. If you and your friend want hassle-free living, then maybe a condo is the way to go. But the most important thing is that you are getting the property at a good value. Well, how do you get the property at a good value? Well, that's another video. But once you find a place, then what? Well, the first thing I suggest is that you and your friend have a written agreement. If you and your friend buy a house with a loan, you're going to sign a bunch of documents from the bank, but you need a separate agreement for you and your friend. In that agreement, at minimum, I would have the following points. Number 1, be sure you agree on the number 5. In real estate, the magic number is 5, as in 5 years. If you were to buy a property with the understanding that you both agree to hold on to it for at least 5 years, that will greatly decrease your chances of losing any money. Over time, historically, real estate does appreciate, but even if it doesn't, you're slowly paying down the mortgage, which helps cushion the fall. Now, granted, money is lost forever to taxes and insurance, but setting a 5-year timeline kicks out the friends who are not serious. Number 2, have a maintenance fund. With any home, repairs will come up. One dangerous thing about buying a home with a friend occurs when a repair comes up and one person has the money to contribute, but the other person does not. Then it becomes an awkward game of one person loaning money to the other. So create a separate bank account and each agree to put money into that account every month. As a rule of thumb, aim for 5% of your mortgage payment. 5%. I told you, the magic number in real estate is 5. Number 3, have an escape clause. Look, you two could be the bestest BFFs in the history of bestest BFFs, but life happens. Imagine you buy a house with your best friend, and after a year, your friend says, I just met this incredible woman, and we are going to get married. In order to pay for the wedding, the honeymoon, and buy our first home as a married couple, I need to sell the house that I own with you. Are you going to tell your best friend no? But on the other hand, why should you be forced to sell when you don't want to? An escape clause can help. The escape clause can be as simple as this. If anyone wants to sell during the first 5 years of ownership, they must pay a $5,000 penalty to the other party. An escape clause can address the concern of what happens if one person wants out, but one person wants to stay in the deal. And number 4, speaking of escape, consider your rental options. When it comes time to sell and go your separate ways, you may not be able to sell at the price you want. Renting is another way to escape from the property. So consider what you could rent the property for. By the way, this is a good exercise regardless, because if you determine that you can't rent the property for an amount that will at least allow the property to break even, well, you may be overpaying. Number 5, the last thing to think about is how you will own the property. There are 2 basic ways to own real estate. Number 1, you can own it as individuals, or number 2, you can own it as a company. The advantage to owning real estate as individuals is that you will get the best financing options. The federal, state, and even local governments want you to be a homeowner, so the best loans always go to homeowners rather than investors. What's more, there may be grant programs to buy your first home. By the way, where do you go to learn about grants? Well, check out these websites if you are in the United States. The National Council of State Housing Agencies and the National Association of Local Housing Finance Authorities are 2 great sites to go to learn about grant buying. The advantage of buying the property in a corporation is that it can be easier for one person to sell. It will also reduce your legal liability, and it could even be easier to get a loan. Now, the loan will not be as attractive as the loan an individual can get, because remember, homeowners always get the better loans than investors. But the rules for a business borrowing money are a little bit simpler than an individual. Now, if you choose to buy a property as individuals, there are typically 3 ways to own the property: joint tenancy, tenants in common, and tenants by the entirety. For most people watching this, if you are considering buying a home as an unmarried individual with your friend, tenants in common is going to be the way to go. However, this can vary by state, so it may be a good idea to talk to a lawyer before you do this. Now, if you're going to go the other direction and buy the property as a company, then most likely forming a limited liability company or LLC will be the way to go. If you go this route, what that means is that the LLC buys the property, the LLC owns the property, the LLC takes out the loan, and the LLC pays all the bills. So you don't own the property, you own the LLC that owns the property. The LLC borrows the money, but you are a guarantor on the loan, which means you agree to use your personal funds if the LLC can't make its payments. Legally, you and your friend are living in the house as renters, renting from the LLC that you both own. The LLC files its own tax return, and the money it makes or loses flows onto your personal tax return. Depending on the state you live in, forming an LLC will cost about $100 to $500 a year, and maybe $500 to $1,500 for a lawyer to draw up the documents. So you can either own it as individuals or as a company. As individuals, you get the best financing and maybe even some grant money. As a corporation, the loan interest rate will not be as good, but the loan itself might be easier to get, and you will have reduced liability if you ever decide to rent the property out to other people. So what's my advice? Well, I won't give you any advice. I won't even give you my opinion. I'll just tell you exactly what I did. I bought my first house with a friend. We owned it as tenants in common to get the best deal on financing. We had numerous conversations about our goals and what we envisioned for the property. We opened a separate joint bank account, and we each put $20 a month into that account. So when it was time to repair the roof 10 years later, the cost of that was a lot easier to bear. We also bought a property that needed a little fixing up. Okay, maybe not that much. But we were able to add some sweat equity into the property, replacing carpets, painting, and updating the kitchen. Lastly, we figured out the market rents. We determined that we could rent the place in a heartbeat. Even at the lowest number, we would only lose about $100 a month in an absolute worst case scenario. And here's the interesting thing. We had an absolute worst case scenario. We bought the property in the mid-2000s and we paid top dollar for it. A few years later, the mortgage crisis of 2007 and 2008 occurred, and my friend got a job out of state. Prices dropped, and my friend wanted to sell. We tried to sell, but we didn't get a single offer, even when we were priced at a price where we would lose money. So we rented the property out, barely breaking even, and that was the best thing that ever happened to us. We still own that property today as tenants in common. The value of it has tripled, and the debt has gone way down, and it's locked in at a great interest rate. Every month, more and more of that debt gets paid off. So from personal experience, I can say that purchasing my first home with a friend was one of the best real estate investments I ever made. If you are in the market and you are having trouble getting the house you can afford all by yourself, it is at least worth having a conversation if you have a friend in a similar situation. The thing about real estate is that historically, if you can hold on to it long enough, it has been a pretty exciting investment. These days, it can be hard to get a hand on that elevator. Buying with a friend is one way to do that. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you have an unusual financial question you want me to answer, please let me know in the comments section below. I'm Peter Billigus, and thanks for watching.